Hold on. There we go. All right, guys. Tonight we're going to do faithfulness. Let me ask you this. It's one of the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Ooh, I don't know what that was. Let me ask you this, though. When you think of the word faithfulness, what comes to mind? What are some of the things that you think about? And what are some of the ways you think about defining that word?
Well, always being there, dependable. What else? Consistent,
Mm-hmm.
constant.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Those are all right. Anybody else?
Loyal.
Loyal. Yep. That's one of the words I was thinking of. Loyalty can be good or bad, right? You can be loyal to a terrible thing, and that's not good. But yeah, the way we're talking about in the Bible, right, is this idea of dependability. It's longevity, a willingness to pursue and continue to walk next to. Hold on, my wife has arrived.
Nancy's trying to get in.
Oh, Nancy's trying to get in?
Yeah. Yeah, just click on the link again and try. Just watch her.
All right, when Nancy shows up, we're going to pretend like we're doing something entirely different. I'll mess with her. Oh, there's Sherry. I'm going to meet Sherry. I'll wait till she joins 1 second. Hey, Sherry. Okay, she's not there. You guys can still hear me though, right? Awesome. Yeah, so we want to talk about faithfulness. So when God calls us to the fruit of faithfulness and says, you can be faithful, even though you will want to try something different, move away. And we think about it often in terms of relationship, right? So faithfulness in marriage is often brought up, right? So this is also in context to who God is too, right? Our faithfulness in the relationship. Now, faithfulness does involve two people, right? And in reality, this faithfulness, we can be faithful because God is faithful to us. So God's part of the relationship. He promises to be faithful to us, which is a wonderful thing when you think about it, right? God's inability, he can't not be faithful, so he's always going to hold up his end. His call to us is to be faithful in our relationship with him. And in doing so, we can be faithful to others. Does that make sense? So one of the things that we think about is that it's easy to be faithful when it's easy. Now here comes Nancy. It's hard when there are things that either threaten us. Hi, Nancy. Either hard or that tempt us away. And we want to talk about that. And I'm going to read an example tonight. So how many of you know the story of Esther in the Bible? Anybody know Esther? Okay. Esther is an entire book of the Bible. There are several devoted just to the story of some amazing women in God's word. So we love to learn from them. In Esther's situation, there was an empire that had taken over Israel at the time, and long story short, there was a lot of people who were of Jewish descent who were in the capital city of this king. And through a series of events, the king found himself without a queen. He basically fired the queen for some behavior that had embarrassed him. So then he began a search in the whole kingdom for a new queen. And there was this interesting young woman named Esther, who ended up being spotted by the king and said, "Wow, that's a woman for me." And she was being raised by her uncle, whose name was Mordecai. And if you think about that for a second, my thought is they don't really explain what happened to her parents. Reality is they probably were dead. So here is this orphan who is raised by her uncle Mordecai. Mordecai was a good, godly man who loved God and raised her well. Again, skipping through parts of the story, which you can go and read, she ultimately becomes the queen, and the king loves her. and she's suddenly becomes one of the most powerful women in the world. Very male-centric kingdom, meaning it wasn't a co-leadership situation. He was the ultimate authority. She was merely probably the side piece in many, many ways. And then something happened. There was this man who was an advisor to the king who was wicked, and his name was Naaman. And he thought of this idea, and he said, you know who I really don't like right now? I don't like Jews. And I want to be able to kill as many of them as I want. But I really need the king's permission to do this. And so he planned to bring this to the king to ask him to gain permission on this. Does that make sense? You guys caught up on the story, at least kind of where we are? And I want to read a little bit of the story around faithfulness and around Esther. So I'm going to read this to you. It's Esther chapter 4. And I'm going to skip through this because we're going to get through the last half of the chapter. So if you've got your Bibles and you want to look, Esther chapter 4, I'm going to kind of be quickly moving through. Then Mordecai, that is her uncle, learned about this plan, right? And he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went into the middle of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. So here he is. When he finds out about the oppression that's planned for him and his people, it breaks his heart. He went as far as to the king's gate, but no one was allowed to enter the king's gate in sackcloth, right? He sat out right outside the palace, right? In each and every province where the command of the decree of the king had came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing. So there was this great sorrow. Now remember, Esther was a Jew. And Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her that the queen writhed in great anguish. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai. And so we see all of this sadness. And then we move through the story a little bit further, right? And he begins to describe to her the plan about what happened and how they're allowed to be killed. And at the very end of this, there becomes this really interesting piece in chapter 10. And this is the problem that Esther begins to realize. Then Esther spoke to Hathach, who was just a man who was going back and forth, and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. She goes, I want you to send this note to my uncle. All the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that for any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner court who are not summoned, but has but one law, that he is to be put to death, unless the king holds out a scepter to him that he may live. And I have not been summoned by the king in more than 30 days. So here's what she says. Here's what she's trying to say in the midst of all this. She goes, Mordecai, I know that I'm close to the king, and you want me to go and implore and talk to him about this horrible plan. But here's the reality. You can't just walk into the king's situation. If he doesn't ask you to come and you barge in and he doesn't want you there, he can have you killed immediately. And this is as his wife. She's saying, yeah, I'm not immune to this. You have to understand, this is a frightening situation for me. And I'm very afraid because my life is now, I'm probably safe, right? As the queen, do you think she's Jewish and safe? Probably. But in reality, all of her people who were not royalty would have been in deep trouble. And she says, my personal safety, if I go to him, is going to be at risk. Let's read the rest of this here. This is the part I want us to think about. Then Mordecai told them to reply to the king. And she said, do you imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews? For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. For who knows, and I love this line, for who knows whether or not you have attained royalty for such a time as this. So what's Mordecai saying to her?
That you were chosen as queen to be able to speak to the king on the behalf of her people.
Sorry guys, I'm plugging in my phone. So.
Yeah, basically like right place, right time.
Okay.
Well, God's time.
You gotta
Nancy,
unmute
you're on
yourself.
mute.
I got you. I got you, Nancy. I can unmute you from here. Nope, I can't. You have to do it.
Here, hello,
There you go. That's beautiful.
with position comes responsibility,
Mhm.
and you being put there, perfect timing, perfect placing. You can't be afraid. You've got to step forward.
Mm. Mm.
Is my
Yeah. What else?
I think like when the opportunity arises, one should definitely like try and take those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. What else? Anything else? Who, in the beginning of the verses, he begins this thing. He says, do you think that you'll be safe? Do you think you're really going to be safe where you are? Is safety what you're worried about? Because guess what? If you don't do it, who is going to bring up? He says someone else will arise and be the protector and help. Who is going to be the one that brings that person? Who is he really referring to? You're still on mute, Nancy. You can stay unmuted, by the way. Who's Mordecai saying is going to ultimately be the one who protects?
God.
God. So remember, what fruit are we covering right now? Faithfulness.
Faithfulness.
Yeah. Who's Mordecai's first recognition? Whose faithfulness is he referring to in that first part of that verse? God's. You see it there?
Yes.
Hey, Esther, if you don't do this, if you're not faithful to what God is calling, God will still be faithful to deliver on his promises here. So his view of faithfulness is not first to Esther. It's first to God.
Amen.
But he calls for Esther to be faithful. He calls her to imitate that fruit that God is going to demonstrate. And then he reminds her of something. You're exactly where you're supposed to be because God has placed you there in order for you to deliver or to exhibit the fruit of what?
Faithfulness.
Faithfulness.
And he's giving her the opportunity, the blessing,
Yeah.
the honor.
That's
And
right.
she just has to step into it.
Yep. And it's fun to be faithful when there's little cost, right? We like high reward, low risks, faithful situations. This is not one of those. This is one of these. She already said, you get it? I can't just walk in there. If I start walking in and he doesn't do it, I'm dead. And that's a powerful piece on all of this, right? Here she's being called. Now let me ask you this. What is she being asked to be faithful to? What part of God's character is she ultimately helping to defend or being a part of defense?
Truth, his truthfulness,
In which way?
in that this will occur and I'm giving you the honor, but it will happen, whether it's you or not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm right, but I do think it's true.
Okay. I think about it like this, guys, and you can help me think about this, is there's wild injustice
Amen.
that is about to happen. And God is a God of truth and mercy and kindness and justice. And her faithfulness that she's being asked to be faithful in is to say, Esther, what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do about it? Because your God, who you know and you love and that cares for you, cares deeply about this injustice, and he's calling you to be faithful. He's asking you to be faithful, not to yourself, not to your needs, but to his character and who he is and what he holds upright. And that's justice and right and mercy and compassion and all those things. And so the point I want to get to is when we begin to align to our own versions, our faithfulness to our own standards, we do an amazing job, right? We do an amazing job of aligning to our own standards and being faithful to that. But here, she's being called to align to God's standards and being pulled into that faithfulness. Does that make sense?
Totally. Totally. And it's harder, a lot harder.
Yeah.
And easier in the ultimate.
Hmm.
One to do it.
Faithfulness asks different questions. It doesn't count cost again. It asks the questions of saying, God, where are you? Where do you want me to be? Where is your heart? And how do I live according so that people can see and experience you? Even if it's at my own risk, right? My own termination, my own life is at risk. I want you to be glorified, and I want my faithfulness, my loyalty, my consistency, my attachment to you to be the thing that draws others to yourself. Does that make sense?
Totally.
That's true faithfulness. Now, let me ask you this. It's not the first time. Actually, let me put it this way. Later in the Bible, we're going to come across a man who was asked to give up his life at great cost for the salvation of many. Anybody have an idea who this man is?
Christ.
Jesus?
There you go. Yeah, Jesus. I was just pausing. Yes, it's Jesus. Lisa, I thought, I'll be honest, I thought you had that one.
I was going to. I really was.
I was also going to say maybe
Henry got
Nehemiah.
first.
It's all over
Lisa,
the
Lisa's
No,
in my community group, and she always yells Jesus, even if it's right or wrong. It's usually right. It's usually right. Hey, point being is Jesus' faithfulness, right? Here we have Esther as a type in one sense, right? An illustration, a brief picture of what Christ would do, right, for us. We're at great risk. He would go before the king and implore for the safety of those who are going to die. But in this case, it would cost him his life because those who were going to die were guilty from the king. In this case, those who were going to die were innocent. And so here we have an example of that right in front of us, of faithfulness against or to what God calls us to. I think it's also one of the best ways to encourage people is to point out, you're being faithful. And they go, it doesn't feel like it. I thought faithfulness was fun and it felt great. This feels like bad stuff, man. And yet in reality, our faithfulness is often just really hard work. And we need to be shown that by others. You're being faithful. Because in the faithfulness, in the walking with God through hard things, God receives joy. He loves that. He loves, and his heart is for us in that. And so often the outcomes are not what we experience. We look at the outcomes and say, God, my faithfulness has produced this outcome I was hoping for. Now you're happy. And God says, I was happy when you were being faithful with no outcome. You were walking with me. And that to me is probably, if I were to think of the ways in which I naturally or encourage people most often, it is pointing that out to them, that they're being faithful and that they can't see the outcome yet or the fruit of it, but their faithfulness is the fruit and their God is pleased. And I just think there's something really heartwarming and there's really something heart connecting to that piece. I'll pause.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah. What other thoughts?
Yeah, I really connect with that because after the first Fighting for Fruit meeting, I talked to you and after the meeting and you pointed out stuff out of me, and that brought insight and clarity to my faithfulness and understanding of who I've been changed over the last 2 years.
Yeah. Good. What else?
It's the truth. It's just the truth. All we have to do is point. We're just flashlights. Just throw the seeds and just keep pointing and pointing and pointing and being there for them. It doesn't mean just throw a seed and then leaving it. You got to water those seeds and water those seeds. And I am so blessed that we don't have much to do. That's all we have to do. It's hard. It's not always easy. It's not always easy. But literally, it's that simple if we just look at it that way. And I'm so blessed. Let's just be faithful and pointing out faithfulness and pointing out your good deeds and pointing out your character and pointing out what you're doing right. Because we're all trying. Even non-Christians. Everybody's trying.
I appreciate the reminder about an outcome too, because I know God's continuing to teach me that when I think I know what I want or what I need, and if I knuckle it and say, this is what, but when I lay it out and say, all right, God, like, I'm not attached to an outcome here, like, just use me however, no matter what outcome it is, I just want to be available and walk with you. And that's what Esther did. Like, she didn't know if the king was even going to like see her, because she hadn't summoned her for like 30 days or whatever. So she didn't even know if she was on his good side, or so just that posture of like, I don't know what the outcome is, but like, God, you got me. Like, no matter what, I just want to seek your face and walk with you intimately. You know, there's just so much freedom when you're not attached to an outcome.
Amen. And Esther, they prepared her. She prepared. She was prepared. She didn't just go in there willy-nilly. She went in there prepared for the king. And I think that's such a good reminder too. We need to be prepared when we speak to people, when we connect.
You know, I got feedback one time in life when I was in business, and they said, Josh, you're not a very good listener. And I was like, what are you talking about, right? I was like, I'm a great listener. I think about all the things I'm about to say right before when you're done talking, you know, and I had to think about that for a long time. And I finally came down to this piece, and I think this applies to us as Christians, which is you're gonna have a critical spirit for others unless you begin to say, what am I looking for? If you begin to look for fruit in the other person, you're going to be finding it. And it gives you a different mission, and it takes away some of this natural critical attitude we have, where I can look at someone who is falling and tripping and banging their head on through life, and for 3 or 4 steps they walk, and you can go, oh, you were faithful. I saw that. I can see the faithfulness there. I can see the peace that you can begin to resonate, because if God is living in these people, you should be seeing fruit. And it is so much more encouraging to show them the fruit. And it's often one of the hardest things to spot in ourselves at times, right? Is, do you see fruit? Do you see you're growing? Do you see that was growth? You did not do that last week, last year, last month. You are growing. I see fruit. Look at the fruit. It's nice fruit. I like that fruit. I mean, you just can go on. And guess what? You are going to lose your critical attitude in about 30 seconds.
I was told once by someone that just to imagine being with that person in heaven and them being, when you're in your crankiest moment, just look at them like they are going to be, you're going to be with them in heaven. And when I do that, I really lose my critical thinking, and I see the joy, and I see God's grace.
I imagine, I like that. I think too, and I'd love some other thoughts too. But man, God knew everything. Jesus knew everything, and how often he was full of compassion. He was moved to compassion, moved to kindness. And I would have been just annoyed at everybody all the time. Like, do not give me omniscience. I would use it for evil. I'd be like, and all of you are idiots. Like, I'd just be terrible. And yet he used it to see the hurt and the fruit and the kindness and the small child that was, or the person that was just an outcast, the edges of society. And so again, I think of this concept of faithfulness. Here's what I'm going to tell you: faithfulness will take you to dark and hard places.
Totally.
If you are faithful, it will take you. And here's why. And my wife and I thought about this, and we have a statement we totally stole from somebody else. So feel free to steal it from me. And the statement somebody said was, "I want to be where your heart is, God." And if that over there is where your heart is, then that's where I want to be. And God's heart is often with the broken, and often with the weak, and often with the outcast, and often with the, you fill in the blank. And yet we're recognizing God's call to faithfulness to us is to step out of our queenness, out of our comfortable robes of queen and kingship, like Esther, and go, wait a minute, you're asking me to risk a lot to be faithful. I'm probably safe here in reality, but God, you're calling me out of this into something that's risky, into something that's hard, and you're calling me to be faithful in that piece of it. I'm going to pause, and then I'm going to read the last two verses. And Nancy suggested them a moment ago. But any other thoughts on this? Any other reflections on the concept of faithfulness? All right. At the very end of starting in verse 13, then Mordecai told them to reply. Verse 15. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go and assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa," that was the city or the capital, "and fast from me, and do not eat or drink for 3 days and nights. And I and my maidens will fast in the same way. And thus I will go to the king, which is not according to the law. And if I die or if I perish, I perish." And she did and Mordecai did, and went away and did as she commanded him. There's this piece of it, right? Faithfulness is not a solo sport. She turns to her community of believers and says, I'm walking into something that's hard and lonely and risky and filled with pain and filled with all these things. I'm going to need you to pray for me, because what I need is I need my God to be faithful to me, and I want my community praying for me, because I'm going to go do this thing. And my life now, you see how the version of her life, what if I die? Before, she was like, if the king doesn't put down his scepter, I could be killed. Here she suddenly goes, that's not the most important thing. Do you see that at the end there? All of a sudden, her life is not the most important thing. The most important thing is going, I'm going to walk, God, where you tell me to walk. And guess what? My life, my death is not my problem. That's yours, God. I got to preach that at someone's death one time. The invincibility of Christianity, of being a Christian, a follower of Christ. If God says you're done, you're done. But until then, you are invincible. And there is nothing you can do to stop either one. So as Christians, we should go do hard things, because we are invincible until God tells us that we're done. I didn't say stupid things, so please do not sign up for stupid things. You heard that here, but you get my point.
I heard you.
Yes. Somebody's going to have to keep an eye on Nancy. She's going to go do something crazy, and I'm going to love it.
Actually, but I do hear what you're saying, and I'm not that girl. I'm I do crazy, but safely. And you're right. It's the bottom line is, it's not about us. It's not about us. It's about Christ. And as soon as I put my eyes on Christ, I'm invincible till he wants me. And when he wants me, he wants me. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
It's so tough and strong. I'm not. I'm a fat baby. But I know what you're saying is true.
I don't know if you guys know this. Monday, my grandmother passed away, and I got the text, and the text was, she's gone. She's in heaven, and I smiled. I was just smiling, because here's her story, and this is what I can leave you with of someone who's faithful. Her husband passed away 18 years ago. Both of them love God. So she was a widow, and she loved to bake and cook. And as the years went on, about 10 years ago, she lost her eyesight. She became blind. And about 10 years ago, she began to ask God a question. And that question was simply this: can I be done? It was just that. Can I be done? And God's answer for 10 years was no. Nope, you're not done yet. But I'm blind. I can't really cook. I have all memorized all of my recipes. I can cook by feel, but it's not the same. And God said, you have one job to do, and that is to pray. And she prayed literally as a blind old lady for 10 years. And she prayed for her grandkids and her family and her friends, and on and on and on it went. And she prayed and prayed and prayed for 10 years because she goes, that's all I have left to do. And every year she'd ask God, can I be done? Can I be done? And then guess what? Monday, guess what the answer was?
Yes.
It can be done. And that to me is faithfulness by my grandmother, to walk a hard, lonely road of widowed blindness and not complain. And I just found that to be an amazing example of that. So both Esther and my grandmother, two wonderful women preaching the gospel right to us in our years. I find that to be good. So guys, it's 7:40. I don't want to keep us long. I'm happy to hang out. I'd love to see if you guys have any thoughts or anything you need from me. But I wanted to leave us with this idea of faithfulness. I think it's a good one.
I am joyful that your grandma's in heaven. I'm joyful that your grandma's in heaven. My mom's passing with someone, and I'm joyful my mom was in heaven.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's how you look at it, because we can be selfish and say what we've lost. But I'm grateful that they have what we'll have one day, and we can reunite. But Josh, I don't dismiss what you're going to have to miss, because you love that woman and she gave you a lot. So I know it can be lonely. So I'm comforted by her ascent, and I'm there for your walk.
I'm still 95% happy, so I'm doing great.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Bless you. I do want to chat with you one day. Soon. Everybody, I'm going to go have dinner. My kids have come home, and we're going to have dinner.
Okay.
If people are screaming, as it's ready. I love you guys.
Bye, Nancy.
And Natalie, I can leave with me.
I have a thought I wanted to kick around on this story. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Esther is one of my favorite stories. I don't know exactly why, but I read it over and over. And one thing that has often struck me was, Mordecai says, who knows, but you've been saved for a time like this. But I think about what it must have been like to be she's probably 13, 14, something like that, when the soldiers showed up at Mordecai's house and said, we're taking you away. And not having any idea what that was going to be, right? So that step, sometimes God pushes us into really unknown, incredibly uncomfortable situations where we have no view of what his long-term plan is. And I think that's probably the theme of this story that has resonated with me a lot, is just learning to be trusting when God opens that door and you're like, I have no idea, why, and we don't even know how many years it was that she was part of this harem, but she got called out and then raised up, and then at the end, again, the thing she was called to do was terrifying, but that was the door that opened. Mordecai's like, gotta do it. And again, she was, you know, the first time she didn't have any choice in the matter, right? She didn't have a choice whether she went to be part of the harem or not. And then the second time she did have a choice. So it just feels like sometimes like building on that helps us prepare. Like each time we go down that alley and at the end see a little bit of the light, it helps the next time God says, knock, knock, knock. You're like, okay, you know, I've done this before. It's not as scary this time. So that's just my kind of my musings on the story of Esther.
I like it.
I just want to add something else to faithfulness. Is that this morning I listened to this motivational like speech on YouTube, and they took a quote from the U.S. Army's Field Survival Guide, and in one section it says, "These fears will cause you to experience psychological defeat long before you physically succumb." And when they mean succumb, they mean death. And yeah, it's just like being faithful is just like it's just pushing forward, as you were saying before.
Yeah, that's true. Anybody else?
No, but I'll just say I'm loving these Wednesday evening gatherings. I'm so glad you've continued to do it, and I'm glad there's a few more this week.
Yeah. Sherry, I don't know if you heard me when I was first jumped on. I think this will be our last one, though.
Oh, okay.
So I said I said I was willing. Under my wife's wise guidance, she says, you have a lot and you've done a lot and you need to break. And I was like, yes, you're right, I do. So well, anyways, I said, everyone look at each other here and pick a buddy and find out.
I just wanted you to be encouraged that it's been, I know it's a commitment of time, and it's just been very, very impactful in my life in ways that someday I hope I'll be able to share with you guys. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and I look forward to seeing all of you eventually.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm looking forward to that too. Yes. I think I heard you say thanks for being faithful in this, which is encouraging to me. So
I didn't use the word, but that was what I meant.
I'm taking it. I'm applying it to the lesson today. So I'm trying. I'll be Esther today. I'm a little something.
Can I ask one question, or do we need to wrap it up?
No, you can ask a question.
So
let me say this: if people need to leave, you're welcome to leave. I'm happy to stay for a little while.
Yeah, if it's too much, it's like, Leah, can't handle it. No, I'm really been growing a lot with my relationship with my brother, who has a very hard heart and who's not walking with the Lord, of what does faithfulness look like? Someone who, like him, who knows truth and grew up in the gospel, grew up in the same family I did, but there is no fruit in his life, not being quick to judge because he's still a beloved child of God who's, prodigal son stories happen. But I guess I've been trying to love him as if he's never going to change, because I found that for my posture, I was always like, until he does this, until he follows through with this. And I was just always anxious. And so faithfulness, you can't really expect that from a non-believer, right? Or am I being too Debbie Downer with that?
No, I think we're looking at fruit of the Spirit. So these are, the reality of what we're studying here is for those who love God. This is something that should be coming out of us. Even if it's a tiny little baby fruit, we should be having these fruits. I think when I think about people that are hard like that, your heart tends to do well when you think about how God has treated you first. It puts us in a position to go, what's his heart toward me? Or what is his heart toward those who are hard? How is he patient? Like the concept of patience and those things, they help me think through some of that. Because the expectation is he needs to find God. And until then,
Can't expect fruit. Yeah.
yeah, you can encourage. There's a lot of things you can do, but again, I think it's a little bit different. Yeah, I remember this one old counselor who trained Megan and I. There was a situation we were dealing with somebody, and he goes, "Oh yeah, that's a 10-year problem." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, 10 years. They'll be ready in 10 years. They'll hear your words in 10 years."
Oh, I hope it's not going to be 10 years.
I didn't say it was yours. I didn't say
Yeah,
it was
I
your
know.
brother.
That's a
in this
bracket,
situation,
though. That's a
he
long
had a-
time.
And he was describing, but he basically he said, "Listen, you have to understand, walking with people means you walk with them for a really long time."
My dad's
I have-
always saying, be patient. Just shut up. No, it's kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I have a friend. I have a reminder on my phone that pops up every Sunday at 9 a.m. And I set it. I put it on. Like, I was so mad. I put it on because it's one friend of mine. And I said, "I'm going to pray for you." And he said, "Don't pray for me." Right. And I was like, "That's it. I'm really going to pray for you."
I'm faithfully going to pray every week for you.
So I put it on as a reminder for 57 years on my phone because I was like, "You are not going to win this."
No, you're not even 57 years old.
So
I'm 57.
I was probably tired of hitting buttons and gave up.
Why didn't you just do it until not have an ending?
Listen, I pray. Like, now you're getting
My
into my
logic.
computer skills here.
But yeah, thank you for your time and faithfulness in leading Josh.
No worries. Happy to.
So, and
Doing good. Are you guys still doing Friday night?
We our community group also paused for the summer.
Okay.
My wife's guidance was to take a break, and
Good. Good.
I'm-
I'm glad to know that. I'm glad you
Yeah.
guys are gonna
Don't
do
burn
that.
out.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's been a lot. It's been a lot with work. So I enjoyed these though. So it wasn't a burden. It was more of just a allowance to breathe. So
Absolutely. Go do that.
yes.
And hugs.
Yes, of course. I'm
Yeah.
I'm an extrovert in exile here, so I'm dying.
Hugs to you and Megan and everybody at your home.
Yeah.
And everybody on the Zoom.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I appreciate the time you put in and the effort and
Yeah.
planning and
No
thought.
worries. No worries. Happy to
good.
do so. All right, guys. I'm going to
Thanks,
let you
everybody.
all run. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.